Welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast, your home for weekly information and inspiration to help you get the graduate job of your dreams.
Hello and welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast with your host, James Curran. The Graduate Job Podcast is your home for all things related to helping you on your journey to finding that amazing job. Each episode I bring together the best minds in the industry, speaking to leading authors, recruiters, coaches and bloggers who bring decades of experience into a bite-sized weekly 30-minute-ish show. Put simply, this is a show I wish I had a decade ago when I graduated. Hello and welcome to the 78th episode of the Graduate Job Podcast. And boy, do we have a goodie for you today, as we have part 2 of our 2-part special delving into the exciting graduate opportunities available with global confectionery and food giant Mars. Last week in part 1, we were joined by Fabio Ailings, who shared his insights on the Mars Leadership Experience graduate scheme and his 10-year journey from fresh-faced graduate to global director for one of their biggest brands. After whetting your appetite last week, this week we explore exactly what you need to do to get a graduate job with Mars, as I'm joined on the show by Andrew Sharp, European Head of Early Talent at Mars. In our detailed interview, we delve into all aspects of the application process for the Mars graduate schemes and exactly what you need to do to bag that graduate job. We go step by step through the application process, from the grades you need to apply to how to stand out in the online application. We cover the different stages from the Skype interview to the online tests through to what to expect in the assessment centre itself with its case study and face-to-face interviews. You'll learn insider secrets for how you can stand out and put yourself head and shoulders above all the other applicants, as you will learn how to avoid being one of the 40% of people who fail at each step of the process. No matter if you haven't listened to episode 1 or not even thought about applying to Mars in the past, this is an episode that you're not going to want to miss. Now don't worry about trying to remember everything you hear today, as a full transcript of today's show and all the links we discuss can be found over in the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/Mars2. You'll also find there links to all of the other 77 episodes of the show which cover every aspect of getting a graduate job, from help with interviews, assessment centres to specific companies, to finding a job you love, to dealing with stress as you look for a graduate job. If it's graduate job related, I've got an episode on it. And if I haven't, let me know and I'll record one for you. Now before we start, let's have a little message from today's sponsor, who are our friends over at careergym.com. Now if I said to you, are you ready to do verbal and numerical reasoning tests for the job of your dreams right now? I bet most of you might say no. Well, graduate employers don't hang about. Some of them give you as little as 2 to 3 days notice before you've got to start doing the tests, so you need to make sure you're ready and willing to do the tests at a moment's notice. So start practicing now, which is where Career Gym comes in. Career Gym is the number one place for you to undertake all of your psychometric tests which you're going to face when you apply for a graduate job. Now the bottom line is, no matter which company you apply for, from global giants like Mars to small companies around the corner, you're going to have to face some type of verbal and numerical reasoning, situational judgment or working style tests. As you'll hear later in the episode, Andrew's advice for passing these tests is to practice, practice, practice. Well, you can practice these at careergym.com. They're all produced by testing experts and exactly the same as the ones you'll see in the real graduate job tests. You can just practice them as you want, or you can do them under time pressure, and they all come with detailed explanations and solutions, and you can track your progress and see how you compare against your peers. If you're applying for a graduate job, you will have to do them, so don't put it off. Pull your finger out and start revising straight away to make sure you don't fall at this very first hurdle. I've been recommending the site for years to the clients I coach, and it comes very highly recommended. And what's even better is if you use the code GJP, you will get 20% off all of their tests. It's a small price to pay to make sure you don't fall at this first step. So head on over to careergym.com, that's careergym.com, and use the code GJP to get 20% off and start practicing today. Now on with the show. I'm very pleased to welcome to the show Andrew Sharp, European Head of Early Talent at Mars. Andrew, welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast.
Well, hi, James. Great to be here.
And today we're going to explore the graduate opportunities that Mars has available. So why don't let's make a start there. So Andrew, Mars is such a huge company across the world. Tell us some of the graduate opportunities that you've got available here in the UK and also in Europe.
Great, yes. So Mars has a great range of opportunities, both across the UK and in Europe. Right now in the UK, we run 5 rotational graduate programs, and they span a number of different functions. Finance, engineering, management, technology, procurement, and also R&D. So we run 5 trainee programs in the UK. Those functional focus areas also are available in Europe too, in a number of different countries: Poland, Germany, France, the Netherlands, Ireland, and Belgium, just to name but a few. But so definitely a good range of opportunities that hopefully will align with a number of different graduates' interests and ambitions as they think about their future career.
Excellent. And with those 5 functional programs, do you apply to one specific one, or does it rotate between the different programs?
Yeah, so you would need to choose which program that you would want to apply for. So definitely think carefully about which one, because you can only apply for one. Of the programs that we run, one of them is more of a general management program. That's called the Mars Leadership Experience. And in that program, you can rotate between functions, because ultimately that program is all around, building our future leaders, our future managing directors or general managers, as we call them, of our future business. So you could rotate from sales to marketing to maybe working in our factory, or maybe in our procurement teams. So the breadth of opportunity there is very big. Whereas if you, as a graduate, are very clear on the direction you want to take and are clear on your functional focus, then those other 4 programs, is where you can actually build some real depth early on, still rotate, and get some great experiences, but you rotate within the function, rather than across the functions. So I think whether you're after a real breadth career or a real depth career, we do have options at Mars for you.
And listeners, if you've not heard my previous episode, definitely listen to my interview with Fabio Ailings, who talks about his 10 years at Mars and starting on the Mars Leadership Experience. And he's had a brilliant career, so you can see where you might end up if you do choose to join the Mars Leadership Experience. And Andrew, so of the schemes, are they all the same length of time? And is it 2-3 years that you'd be on the graduate scheme for?
Yeah, they're all the same length of time. So it's a 3-year experience, and you would do 3 rotations. So it would be, each rotation would last 12 months in length, and the intake would be every September. So you would apply in the autumn, probably before you wanted to join Mars. You would get your offer around January, February, March time of the following year to then join in September. And then from that September start, 3 12-month rotations before finishing the scheme, that kind of 3 years later. Excellent.
And how many people are you looking to recruit this year?
So in the UK, probably around 30. So we at Mars really think about quality of the experience. So we're not a big employer of graduates in terms of the volume of hires that we take, but we make the experiences count, and so we've always prided ourselves on being an employer that really focuses on great line management, great placement, and with that, we are choiceful around the number of opportunities we provide, and that's always been a great recipe for success for us. And obviously, you mentioned earlier Fabio, who's just a great example of some amazing experiences he had. We don't want to dilute that experience from making this a very, very large program, because we think that will detract from the experience we can give.
And where geographically would graduates be based?
So in the UK, we have a number of different offices and factories, as far north as our Leeds factory, and as far south as our Plymouth factory, and everywhere in between. So really, a number of different opportunities across the UK, across around 10 different sites. So yeah, hopefully there's a location near you if you are interested. But yeah, we've definitely got some good focus and breadth of locations across the UK.
Well, if you've got a factory in Leeds, you can't be going far wrong. So I think that's one that, as my local hometown, I think that's one where graduates want to be aiming for.
Oh, very good.
And what would the career progression be like then? So 3 years on the scheme, what sort of roles can they expect to then progress into?
Yeah, so I mean the acceleration is rapid on the program. So by the time you come to the end of your program, you could be a senior buyer for our organisation. You could be a senior brand manager working on one of our best loved brands like Mars or Snickers or Pedigree, or maybe be one of our national account managers, working with one of our big grocery accounts that we obviously work with very closely. So the seniority that you would and responsibility that you get on the program continues well beyond the program finishing. And so we have very high expectations of our graduates, and with the expectation comes that responsibility. And I think as they come off the program, as our graduates come off the schemes, we do see that acceleration and that pace of development continue. We hope 5-10 years after the program that you are joining management teams, becoming a senior leader in our organisation, becoming a marketing director, sales director, a future managing director. And so I think, we have got evidence of that happening with many, many graduates that have come onto and signed up our programs going into those roles. And that's the ambition that we have. And we feel that we're doing quite well in that area of making sure that happens for many of our graduate trainees.
You mentioned about expectations from graduates. Do you have any, in terms of grade expectations? Does it need to be? Is it minimum 2-1? Or any particular universities that you focus on more than others? Or you open to the type of degree that people do and things like that?
Yeah, so we ask for a 2-1 degree. Depending on the program that you're applying for, it depends on whether there is a discipline requirement. So only really in the technical areas like R&D and engineering is there a real focus on a specific discipline. So in R&D, more not that's in the kind of the sciences. In engineering, that is obviously for more engineering disciplines. But in the other programs, we purposefully try to ensure that the disciplines that we look for is as broad as possible. And so in many of our programs, we will accept applications from students with any background, because we really do believe that actually in those areas, it's much more about the soft skills, the leadership skills, the innate behaviours that actually that set you up for success at Mars, less around the degree background.
No, that's very true. And maybe then if we dive into the application process. So what does the application process look like? Does it start with, is it initial online application and filling in questions where you got 100 words to talk about your competencies?
Yes, so you're absolutely right. So it starts with an online application. So you would visit our careers website, and there's a section there on early careers. And yes, that's where you would register and start your application form online. At that point, we would be looking for your, apart from the standard kind of basic questions, a biographical question, background, we'd also, be looking for your responses to 3 questions around certain competencies that are important for Mars and the program that you're applying to. If you're successful at that, you then go through a couple of other stages before you reach the final assessment centre. So you would do an online test, and then an interview, and that would be comprised of a digital interview and a Skype interview, followed closely by the assessment centre, where you would come in and meet some of our existing trainees. You would get to hear from them around their experiences, good, bad, and different. We want to provide you with an honest view of the experiences that you can have here at Mars. But you would also then be joined by senior leaders, senior leaders from the business or from the function that would put you through your paces on the day, and if successful on that, you would then be offered a role on one of our programs.
Excellent. And If we just maybe break those down in turn. So with the online application, what is it what makes a good application stand out from others? What is it that you're really looking for in the where you've got in those 3 questions?
So, being a graduate myself, I know the challenges around the job market, and I think many graduates take a different approach to applying for roles. Some go for the kind of apply for many employers and hope for the best, and others really give maybe a handful of employers their best focus. My advice would always be with the latter option, because I think when we come to screening the applications, I think it can become very obvious very quickly as to those that really are committed and passionate around Mars versus maybe are just, kind of adding Mars onto a list of several employers. I mean, sometimes you'll even see examples of where candidates actually mention another employer rather than mention Mars, so you can quickly, it's been a bit of a copy and paste, and that's never a good sign. So I think, give it focus and really make sure Mars is up there, in your kind of preferred list of employers, and really then be really clear on why Mars and why the program, and be really articulate around your motivations. That's something that's important in the application form, irrelevant of the program that you apply for. And then I think the other advice I would give is really think about how, and there's probably a couple of competencies, that are really important, irrelevant to the program. One is around how you get and deliver results. That is very much around how you face into ambiguity, really kind of overcome against the odds, overcome setbacks and roadblocks that might get in the way in your personal and professional life today. How you go about overcoming those, that's an important skill and trait that we would be looking for. And then I think the second one is around relationships. Mars is a relationship-driven organisation. We take the relationships that we have with ourselves, with our teams, and with the business very seriously, and that's how we get things done. It's through great collaboration. And so how you work with others, how you work together to achieve maybe shared goals and objectives, that's also another competency that I think you would see come through the application process, because it's so important for success at Mars.
That's you make great points there, and completely agree about the copy and paste method. Is the scattergun approach of, the more companies I apply to, the better my odds. It's completely the other way around. You just need to focus down, and I've seen that as well when I was looking through graduate applications, and you'd see people just copy and paste in other names, other companies, and it just goes straight in the bin. So there's no coming back from making mistakes like that on the initial application form. What percentage of people do you think fail to get past that first initial stage?
So I would say, it varies by program and by country that we run, but I would say overall, probably around 40% of candidates get through the initial application stage. It's about 40%. So it is if I think about the overall process, we probably pass through 40% through each stage on average, through the process. So 40% would get through, then another 40%, and then the 40% of that as we work through the process. It's average is 40. It can be higher, can be lower, depending on the stage, the program that they apply for, or that you apply for, and the country. But overall, that's about the average.
Any advice then for the next stage, for the online tests, other than to practice, I guess?
Well, yes. I mean, you stole the words out of my mouth, Jan. So certainly practice. The tests that we use are what we call adaptive tests at Mars, and these are basically designed to almost kind of the questions that you get are dependent on the answers that you give and the speed at which you give them. So they're almost designed around you and designed around the individual. So they're not timed, but they give you an opportunity to basically answer from obviously a multiple choice question, and so you get a number of answers to choose from. The quicker you are and the more accurate you are, the harder the questions get more quickly, if that makes sense. And so some people may find that they're only answering 10 questions. Some people might find them answering 20. And don't let that put you off. So that's the intelligence of the test, almost kind of factoring in the responses that you've given to date. Yeah. So please do practice. Don't worry if you only got to answer 5 questions as you get to those tests. And my other advice is to probably think about, if you have any technical issues, I think choosing the right browser is always a good troubleshooting tip. Yeah. Because sometimes with some of the online tests out there, they can sometimes have some challenges with let's say Microsoft. With Microsoft. So maybe think about, not Microsoft, with Windows. So maybe have a think about using Chrome. Yeah, that's always a tip that I think has often got candidates through any maybe technical gremlins that are coming or getting in the way.
Excellent. And also, I guess, have a decent internet connection. Don't be doing it on your phone while you're on a bus or the tube.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend doing it at home with a laptop, PC, or a tablet is probably best. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And would that be what verbal, numerical, working style, or which other tests could people expect?
Yeah, I would. It depends on the program, but I would be expecting either logical or numerical.
Excellent. And listeners, practice does make perfect with those tests. So make sure you put the effort in. Dig out those old GCC notes and make sure you can remember how to do your percentage increase and decrease and good stuff like that. So moving on then to the interview. So starting with a digital and then a Skype interview. So what are you looking for at this stage?
Yes, so with the digital interview, this is a new tool that we've introduced this year. I know a number of other employers have also introduced this tool in recent years, and the concept of the digital interview is relatively new. It's where ultimately, you as an applicant would first of all, you click on the link, you would hear from Mars, so you would hear from some of our trainees, from some of our senior leaders, actually from me. Yeah, I'll be on there too, so you can put a face to a name. And we're basically just framing that stage of the process to make you feel comfortable. You would then hear some questions from us, 3 questions in total. They do vary depending on the program that you're applying for, and then you would have some time to record your response. Yeah, that would then be reviewed by a member of the team, by a member of the Mars team at a later point before you would obviously find out your outcome. So, in terms of what we look for in that interview. I think there's a couple of other competencies that I think we would be particularly diving into. One is around dealing with ambiguity. This is we live in a complex world, and Mars is an organisation where you have to work through organisational design. You have to work through the organisation, kind of how to get things done in the organisation. Sometimes you have to look at the formal channels and then the informal channels to get things done. And sometimes the task ahead is not always clear. And how you then face into that ambiguity, how you deal with it, cope with it, or perhaps even embrace it, is something that would be really important for us to understand, in terms of how you would deal with that. Because ultimately, as a graduate on one of our programs, you would be dealt with very complex, very ambiguous projects, and it's up to you, to find a way through. Obviously with the support and the coaching of the business, of your line managers and your mentors, that goes without saying. But ultimately, the responsibility still rests with you to reach out, to find the answers, to find the support, to work through the organisational design that we have at Mars. So I think dealing with ambiguity is definitely one. I think the other one is around, what I would call standing alone. So standing alone is how you sometimes, you're faced with a challenge or a conflict or a difference of opinion, or actually you strongly believe that this is the direction that Mars needs to take in a certain area. And obviously we empower all associates at Mars, including our graduates, and how a graduate when they have something that they truly believe in, how do they stand up for that and fight the corner for what actually they think is the right outcome for Mars or for the stakeholders around us. Yeah, and sometimes that can feel uncomfortable, and sometimes that keeps us awake at night. But how do you as a future potential candidate at Mars, how do you deal with that, and how do you cope with being able to stand alone? I think that is another competency that we would like to hear more from you around in the digital interview.
Excellent. Some really good pointers there for your listeners. And Andrew, is that a one-take only thing? So you get the question and then boom, you've got 2 minutes to talk about it, or is it time limit, or how does it work?
Yeah. So ultimately, there is so it's one chance. Yeah, like it's almost trying to mimic almost like a real life interview in many respects. Sometimes when you come out of those face-to-face interviews, sometimes you always wish I could have had my time again. But
yeah,
the reality is you don't. It's that moment in that interview, and therefore the digital interview that we have, the digital assessment, is the same. Yeah. So there's a minimum and a maximum. So you have between 1 and 5 minutes to record your response. I would always recommend, where possible, that you maximise your use of the time, and that's purely because we want to gather evidence. Yeah, we want to look at all the great things and the experiences that you've had, and the maybe through some great examples that you're giving. We want to find out about you. We want to find out about what you can bring to the organisation and what's important to you. And the only way that we can gather that evidence is through hearing from you. Yeah, and so my recommendation, my advice to you would be try to use as much of that time as you can. Obviously, don't waffle, don't repeat your points, don't duplicate your answers. If you've managed to kind of talk through your response, yeah, and you feel comfortable with that you've given the full spectrum of information that's required, then close it, of course. But I would always recommend getting closer to the 5 minutes than the 1 minute. That would be my advice.
Excellent. No, that makes complete sense. And then they would move on to the Skype interview. So is that a video interview or just a telephone call?
So that's a video. It's a Skype interview. So what you would get is you would get an invite from the team, and that Skype interview would then be with kind of a senior manager in Mars. Yeah, and more often than not, in most cases, what we are assessing in that Skype interview, which usually lasts probably 30 to 45 minutes, that Skype interview is really focusing on your learning. Well, it's 2 things actually. First of all, it's your learning. So how do you learn from your mistakes? How do you learn from the experiences that you've had in your life? And how do you almost take those and use them as an opportunity to improve? Because when you think about the programs and the experience you're about to get in the next 3 years on the program, the learning never stops. And it's as much around, development at Mars and in general, it's as much around learning from your mistakes, but actually then applying those learnings to improve your approach in the future. So that concept of learning and then doing something about it is something we would focus on in the Skype interview, alongside, where relevant and appropriate, functional technical assessment. So if you're applying for the R&D program or the engineering program, there'll be some questions in there that really look at, kind of your knowledge, skills, and understanding of that functional area. Yeah, so there'll be some questions in there that specifically call out that, and perhaps are going to be testing you on maybe some of your modules that you might have studied at university, for example. Yeah, and there'll be an opportunity there for you to really demonstrate your capabilities around the functional area that you're applying for. So those, I'd say, are the 2 areas that certainly would be a focus for the Skype interview. There may be some others too, but those would definitely be 2 that I would call out.
Excellent. Again, really good pointers for you there, listeners. Just sticking with this Skype interview, Andrew, what are some of the main ways that people tend to let themselves down at this stage?
So I think when it gets to the Skype interview, I think being prepared for kind of some of the kind of the more competency-led questions, I think, is always key. So sometimes, our senior managers can run the Skype interview and say, oh, well, actually, on that occasion, they didn't really have any good examples of where they worked well as a team, or where they've, kind of overcome a challenge, or they didn't really kind of have a good understanding of where maybe around what their development needs are, or what their strengths are. And sometimes I think, certainly from my experience of being a graduate and applying for programs, I was always told, well, make sure that you have some of those practice examples and to hand. Yeah, and so sometimes those that maybe do trip up don't have those examples to hand, and so it's difficult to gather the evidence then. Yeah, and so my advice would definitely be, think about those competencies and capabilities that are important to organisations, like teamwork, like collaboration, like being able to deal with conflict, or being able to influence, negotiate. These are all skills that are important in the workplace. And so really have a think about where you've done that, at college, at university, maybe through some work experience that you already had, and be really clear in your example around, what the situation was, what you did, and then what happened, and what was the outcome. I think it's always good in an interview scenario. I always recommend using the STAR technique. Yeah, so the STAR technique stands for, S is for situation, so really explain the situation of the example that you're giving. What was the context? T is for task. So what was the challenge ahead for either you or those involved in that particular example? A for action. So what happened, and actually what did you do? What was your personal role in that action? And then finally, R for result. So what was the outcome? Yeah, and I think if you apply that STAR technique to your answers when you're being asked to provide examples of when you've demonstrated a certain skill or competency, then I think that will stand you in good stead, for giving a good interview response.
No, that's great advice, and as well. And I just add with the STAR technique, just make sure that when you are giving an answer, that if you're talking about a team example at university, that you're talking about what you did as opposed to what the team did. That you're the person who's being hired, so make sure you do shine a light on the work that you did, as opposed to being too coy and not talking about your own skills and what you've brought to the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on then to the final stage, the assessment centre. You mentioned some of the different aspects that people can expect there. Is it tend to be a full day, or is it half day that people can expect?
Yeah, it tends to be a full day. And usually it's 3 or 4 activities, depending on the programme. So, they do vary by programme, but if I were to say, what are the most likely 4 types of activities, then the first one would be a case study. So this is where you have to read through, some complex information to be able to then process it, analyse it, and come up with a recommendation. The second type of activity that you may do is around a group exercise. So where you are together with other candidates that have reached that stage of the process to work through a scenario, a challenge, and come up with a solution together. The third one is maybe a role play, particularly in some of our functional programs where you may, I'll use our procurement program as an example, where you're, need to kind of put yourself in the shoes of a buyer, and you're buying products or services from suppliers, and actually how do you face into that negotiation conversation? Same applies to maybe in sales roles. How do you front into a customer conversation when you're negotiating a business plan for the year for Mars? So a role play is definitely a good way of testing that kind of, putting yourself in the shoes of a day in the life almost of what you may be doing whilst you're on the program. And then the fourth, of course, is the interview. And that usually happens at the end of the day for Mars. And the reason why we run the interview at the end of the day is because we like to gather all of the evidence from the previous exercises And then we like to tailor the interview to really deep dive on any areas that we would like to focus in on, so that we feel comfortable, that we've gathered all of the necessary evidence. I talked about the collection of evidence earlier. It's really important for us to make sure that we've gathered the evidence that we need at some point during the day, so that we feel comfortable and confident that we're making the right decision. The right decision for Mars and the right decision for the potential associate joining us. Those are probably the four main types of exercises you may experience when you come to a Mars assessment centre.
Ah, sounds like a challenging day. So we start with the case study. Would they get the case study in advance, or is it just one that they get on the day to get into?
Yeah, so you would get it on the day, and you would usually have, depending on the case study, you tend to have between 45 and 90 minutes to prepare. So clearly, there's a lot of information in these documents, and it's purposely designed to be complex. So my advice when you pick up that case study and you open it, don't panic. Because everyone's probably thinking the same thing, like, oh my God, I've got, let's say, 30 pages of information to read, and I need to not only read this, take it in, analyse it, but then I also need to do a presentation at the end. I need to present my recommendation. And I think my first advice is don't panic. And my second piece of advice is to really break down the case study into its component parts and always go back to the brief. So what is it that we're asking of you? And really kind of cut through the noise of the detail, because that's what you need to do in the workplace. Is you've got lots of tasks, lots of things going on. How do you make choices, and how do you prioritise the necessary work or approach, or in this case, the necessary information? And so it's perfectly designed to see how you make the complex simple, and how do you almost kind of declutter your mind and really then be articulate with actually what is the way forward. Please don't panic. Please break it down into its component parts, and make sure that you keep going back to the brief, and don't let the level of information in the case study pack distract you from what the original brief was.
Well, that's brilliant pointers there, and one that I've also found is true for the group exercise is often groups will forget or lose track of what the original question was, what they're asked to do, and go off down on tangents. So moving on then to the group exercise, how do the best candidates stand out in the group exercise?
Group exercise, James, are always interesting ones. And I've many group exercises, observed many in my time over my career, and I think this is often the case where sometimes a candidate can inadvertently kind of be the person. The most likely chance where this is the exercise where the candidate is most likely to inadvertently be the person they think we want them to be, rather than just being themselves.
Definitely.
So look, first of all, be authentic. Be you is really important in this, because more often than not, our senior managers and our leaders that are on that day are all too familiar with what is authentic and what's not. So be yourself is the first point. With the group exercise, more often than not, most employers clearly are looking for how you work together as a team, and hopefully you're going into that recognising that that's one of the big competencies that we are trying to gain evidence of. One thing I think that's really important to call out, a couple of points. One is just around, it's a general point around style, and all of us are introverts and extroverts, and that's who we are, and that's who you should be at Mars. And what we recognise, is that actually introverts and extroverts can play a different role, in these group exercises. And what we absolutely are not expecting is people to shout the loudest. That is not good evidence of teamwork, and that's not good evidence of leadership. ultimately, people have different value and can bring different benefits and traits to a team and the success of a team, and that applies in the workplace as much as it does in this group exercise environment. So be you. Don't feel the need that you have to shout the loudest. Of course, you have to contribute, and please don't say, we have had cases where candidates have just said nothing for 30 minutes, and if you don't say anything, we can't gather any evidence for that competency, and that's not going to be a good. That won't lead to a positive outcome. So please do say something, but think about when you contribute, how you want to contribute. We recognise that introverts may take some time to warm up, and therefore it's about your overall contribution across the whole, let's say, 30 minutes, and it's not about the person that speaks first or speaks the longest or has the most airtime. It's about just the right contribution at the right time with quality, rather than just quantity. So that would be one tip. And then I think the second tip, which is very relevant to Mars, is very much around what does success and what does leadership look like in group exercises. And I think this does vary by sector and by employer. I do see differences. At Mars, we measure the success of our development by the success of those around us. It's a really important phrase. It's a really important mantra that has lived with Mars for many, many years from the founding family members. And it's something that we live to every day. And it's about being great support, but great team players, great collaborators, great line managers for our teams. And if we can help them grow and we can support them, then we are certain to prosper as an associate. And so demonstrating role model, inclusivity, collaboration, teamwork, it's not about being the best and getting the right answer and you being seen as the winner. It's more about how you involve others, how you get to the solution and the recommendation. That is what we're looking for. It's not about someone winning the task. And certainly not winning it in a way which is to the detriment of others around the group. So definitely a tip for when you're thinking about applying to Mars and what our culture is all about. That's really important to us.
No, that's brilliant advice there, and I do think that The Apprentice does have a lot to answer for with people sort of watch episodes and think that's the way they need to perform during a group exercise. But it's couldn't be farther from the truth.
Absolutely, do not take learning from The Apprentice when applying for Mars. Please don't.
So the next stage is something I've not actually done personally myself. Again, with the role play, then what separates the candidates who get through from maybe the candidates who struggle?
So I think this is about being assured. Being assured and confident with your approach and your style. With role plays, and particularly in the functions that they're used, it's usually used to determine how you cope with conflict or how you cope with the need to influence others, to your way of thinking. So very common in sales, very common in the procurement program. So our buying things. You ultimately, in the workplace, you will get challenges every day from suppliers or customers saying, no, I don't agree to that. And actually, at this end, on the Mars side, you can't agree to their recommendation either, but you need to find common ground. So I think how you cope with conflict scenarios and how you push back in the right way, to find commonality, common ground, I think is key. So obviously the two extremes is where you kind of hide in the corner, for want of a better word, and you just accept the views of the person on the other side of the role play. That's not a good response, because we need you to represent Mars and represent Mars well in those conversations in terms of representing our position. On the other extreme, it's where it's almost that fight or flight, and you fight back, and you go almost on the offensive, but in a way that really frustrates, annoys, ultimately does not lead to a productive, collaborative environment, and people could, in that instance, walk away feeling very unhappy with the conversation. That's not going to lead to a successful partnership or sustainable relationship with that with that customer or that supplier. So it's finding that middle ground around how do you manage conflict or differences of opinion in a way that is a win-win. Yeah, it's finding the win-win, and that's where you need to, my advice would be, how do you find the commonality? What do you agree on? Actually, if you disagree on X, Y, and Z, let's call out first of all, why are we here? Well, actually, let's take the buying, the procurement conversation. The supplier wants to provide a great service to Mars at a cost which is commercially viable for them. And what does Mars want? Well, actually, they want a good supplier that has got good governance, that has great environmental credentials, that supports our principles and the way that we do business. But also, we also need to do that in a way which is efficient and actually creates value for Mars. Yeah. So the desire for mutual value and mutual benefit is an example of where there is commonality. How do we then define what that looks like? Okay, that's something that will need to be worked through the conversation. But it's about finding that middle ground, yeah, and the commonality, and that's the sweet spot, which I would be recommending you all would think about. Don't go to either extreme that I mentioned earlier. That wouldn't be seen as a good response to that particularly challenging scenario that you're being presented with.
Yeah, no, that sounds, again, really, really quality advice there. So we'd move on to the final stage that's standing between the listeners and a graduate job with Mars. The interview at this point, it's been a long day, feeling quite frazzled. They've had 3 challenging exercises. How can they stand out when it comes to the final interview?
So I think at the interviews and the final assessment itself, the assessors, our assessor team are our senior leaders in the business. So these are managing directors, our sales directors, finance directors. This is the leadership team, that you'll get to meet, which is a great, obviously, opportunity to connect with the leadership team, to learn from them, but also to ask questions around the program and the themes, of course. When you think about our leaders and that final interview that you've reached, they are now kind of, in their minds, they are thinking, right, okay, can I see this individual as being in my role one day? And that's what they will have in their minds. Yeah, can I see this person 10 years from now, 12 years from now, coming through that program and being in my role? Yeah, because that's the aspiration for the program. Yeah, that in a very accelerated period of time that you will be in these leadership positions. So I think at this point it's around really being clear on your leadership. Yeah, what is your leadership style, your offer, and making sure that's authentic. Yeah, so it's looking at kind of what you stand for as it relates to leadership. I think that's an important kind of one that I would try to reinforce or share. Yeah, in that interview is what you stand for and what you believe in and what your kind of leadership focus is. I think the second area is around aspiration. So being really clear on why you're here and why you're applying and where you want to go. Yeah, because what you need to remember is, and I think this applies to many graduate employers, the people in that final interview won't always necessarily see your application form, your digital interview. Yep. Some of those other outputs they won't necessarily see. They'll have an overview. Yeah, and they'll walk into that room understanding your profile, understanding kind of, where we want to cover, what questions we want to ask. They will have that, but they won't necessarily have the responses to your questions in the application form. They'll probably have them written down, and they'll have some insights, but it's really up to you to really hone in again on what you want them to leave the room thinking about. Yeah, you. And so don't worry about repeating an example or a scenario or a question that you may have covered previously in the application process. Our assessors at that final stage trust that you are all at this stage for a reason, and trust the assessment benchmark and process. And so now it's just, okay, what's important to me? Leadership, your ambition, your aspiration, which I'll talk about now, and then finally potential, which I'll also talk about. So going back to your original question, James, what are they looking for? Yes, it's leadership. What's your authentic leadership offer style? The second is around motivation and aspiration. So why are you here? Why Mars? Why this program? Where do you want to go? And how do you feel that you're going to get there? So being really articulate around the journey that you feel you would need to go on and the support that you would need to get along the way, being really articulate about that will be seen as a very positive factor. Yeah. That's the second one. Third one, as I mentioned, was potential. So, it's on the point of entry, as we call it at Mars, is around great performance. So when you are in those placements, on those 3 rotations, you'll be given and agree your objectives with your line manager, and you'll be expected to deliver, and probably go on the learning curve quicker and deliver some great results for Mars, and that's almost a given, and we have many great experiences and tasks and projects that you can get your teeth into that can prove that you're a strong performer at Mars. What's different around potential is around actually how do you take those experiences and use them to accelerate your development over time. So it goes back a bit to the question earlier, James, that you asked about the Skype interview around that kind of how do you learn from your mistakes, how do you learn from the experiences that you've had, and then apply them in the future. So, I always see this as a bit of a test or an opportunity for you to say, well, how do you kind of know what to do in a scenario when actually you've never experienced that scenario before? So how do you know what to do when you don't know what to do? And that's taking all those experiences that you've had from your time, personally and professionally, and saying, actually, with that experience previously, I can connect the dots, I can make some assumptions, and I can move forward quickly, and I can make a decision, and I know who to speak to, how to get the information, and how to push forward. And that is, in the eyes of our leaders who are in that interview, that is a great example and evidence of potential. So, in summary, the 3 things that I would call out. One is around leadership and what your authentic leadership style is. Second is around ambition and aspiration, and then the third one is around demonstrating your potential, more than and other than just performance.
Well, Andrew, thank you. There's just so much brilliant advice there for anyone who's applying to Mars. Just when they get to the interview stage now, they know exactly the 3 things that they need to be talking about. So thank you for that. Time is unfortunately though running away with us. So maybe just one final question before we finish. What one tip would you give to someone who's applying to Mars this year?
So for me, it's around being curious. And by that, it's around being curious around Mars and being curious around what we do, why we do it, being passionate about the sector that you're applying to, be passionate around Mars and what we're doing, and hopefully bringing in all the research and the experience that you've gathered as part of your preparation for the application process. But also being curious about you, and what you can get from the development experiences on our programs, what the support model looks like, being curious around how you could perhaps, benefit from feedback and coaching, and being curious around what maybe you might need to do differently to accelerate your own development journey. And it's about being open and to suggestions, open to maybe some challenging feedback that you might get. But definitely being curious about, be willing to kind of open up those blind spots about you, your development, and what you ultimately may need to do differently to be successful. And then I think curiosity around actually the willingness to kind of break with convention. So we have got a big challenge ahead of us as an organisation, but as a sector more generally. As we embrace digitization, as the consumer and customer landscape changes fundamentally, and actually it's our early talent community, it's our future leaders, it's the millennial generation that can come in and help us as an organisation break with the status quo and help us, almost think about our business of the future, and being curious and willing to push down the barriers, break down maybe traditional ways of thinking, bringing those into the conversation during the assessment process, I think it would be really important for us right now at Mars, because we are on a journey of change, driven by some external factors, and as the landscape evolves for us, externally and internally. And so I think that curiosity is a theme that I think kind of spans a number of different elements and areas, and I think that will help us stand out, as a candidate, over and above the rest. So that would be my overall message: is to be curious as you go through the process and demonstrate that curiosity in every single conversation that you have.
Andrew, thank you. That's a lovely point for us to finish the interview on. Thank you so much for appearing on the Graduate Job podcast today. What's the best way that listeners can find out more about Mars and the graduate opportunities?
Yeah, so you can get in contact with Mars through our social channels. So we've got Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn accounts. So give us a search, and you can find lots of great content on there, not just about our programs, but also around our business, our office environment, our culture, some of the great initiatives and activities that we're currently getting involved in. So do give us a search, and we'd love to connect in with you and have a conversation.
And all the links to everything we discussed today, including all the links to Mars and all the different streams, can be found on the website at graduatejobpodcast.com/Mars. Andrew, thank you so much for appearing on the Graduate Job Podcast.
Thanks, James. It's been great to have a good conversation today. And for those of you that do decide to apply, good luck.
So listeners, there you go. Part 2 of my 2-part special on the brilliant graduate opportunities available with Mars. Many thanks to Andrew for his time and also the insights that he shared. If you're applying to Mars, make sure you listen back to this one a few times, and do check out the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/Mars2. Andrew has laid out everything that you need to do to succeed, so make sure you take his advice in hand. Applications are open now, so don't hang about. The show notes have a full transcript and links to everything that we've discussed today. It's also a treasure trove of other episodes on the website, which are going to help you no matter where you are in your job search. Whilst you're there, don't forget to head on over to graduatejobpodcast.com/subscribe and sign up so that you don't miss a thing. Now, despite my best intentions, I know I can be sporadic in getting episodes out to you, so it's the best way to stay up to date with what I'm up to. I'm also developing a brilliant course on how to get a graduate job, which is going to distill down all my years of coaching into one place, so do subscribe to make sure that you don't miss the launch details for that one. If you have any questions or need some help coaching or with an application, then drop me a line. Send me an email to hello@graduatejobpodcast.com. Right, that is everything from me today. Join me next week when I'm joined by Emma Rosen, who shares how she tried 25 different careers before the age of 25. It's a cracker. Hope you enjoyed the show today, but more importantly, hope you use it and apply it. See you next week.